God is talking. Subscribe.
Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. Today we're going to be exploring something, well, honestly, it's a bit controversial. It's the connection between sex and education and how those things play into the way societies evolve over time. We're going to be looking at all this through an excerpt from a book that frames this as a dialogue with a higher power. But think less about religious dogma here and more about challenging our preconceived ideas about, well, pretty much everything, if we're being honest.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out right from the start, this source does not hold back. It uses some bold language, even profanity at times, to really shake things up. It's not afraid to make us uncomfortable, especially when it comes to how we think about sex and, all those ideas about propriety.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't shy away from strong opinions. I mean, one of the main arguments it makes is that this societal obsession with what's proper, especially around sex, might actually be limiting our joy and personal growth. And it uses some really interesting cultural comparisons to kind of drive that point home.
Right, like it highlights how certain Aboriginal and Polynesian cultures, they view lovemaking very openly. And get this, they have much lower rates of sexual violence compared to societies with stricter norms around sex. And the source suggests that, maybe, just maybe, this is because these cultures don't repress or shame natural desires, which could potentially lead to healthier expressions of sexuality overall.
It's a thought-provoking connection for sure. It really makes you wonder if our own hang-ups about sex could actually be contributing to some of the problems we see in our own society.
Absolutely. And the source takes this idea even further. It proposes this radical idea of asking ourselves, what would love do now? And using that as a guiding principle in all our decisions, especially those that involve other people. Like, what if instead of getting caught up in what's proper or acceptable, we asked ourselves, what would a loving approach look like in this situation?
It seems simple on the surface, but I can see how that question could have a ripple effect, changing how we interact with each other and with the world around us.
Right, and this leads to another fascinating point the source brings up. It argues that betrayal of self to avoid betraying another is still betrayal. It's a bit of a head-scratcher at first.
Yeah, it's definitely a concept that needs some unpacking. What's it getting at there?
Well, it's suggesting that when we suppress our true selves, even if we think we're doing it to please others or avoid conflict, it ultimately harms everyone involved. We might think we're being selfless by conforming to expectations. But the source argues that we're actually doing a disservice, both to ourselves and the people we care about.
Like we're perpetuating a cycle of inauthenticity. And that can lead to all sorts of problems down the line.
Exactly, and the source goes on to explore this idea in more depth. But for now, I think it's something worth pondering. Another area the source tackles head-on is sexual abstinence. And it doesn't necessarily advocate for complete abstinence, but it encourages us to move beyond those addictive or compulsive behaviors around sex and find a balance that aligns with our values and our own personal evolution.
So it's about being more conscious and mindful of our choices around sex, rather than just following those often rigid and restrictive norms imposed by society.
Right. It's about questioning everything, even those things we consider givens. It's not about blindly accepting what we've been told, but about engaging in critical thinking and arriving at our own conclusions.
Which leads us perfectly to the source's critique of education.
Oh, yeah. This is where things get really interesting. The source goes all in criticizing education systems that prioritize rote memorization over the actual application of knowledge. It's basically saying we're churning out graduates who know a bunch of facts, but lack the wisdom to apply them in any meaningful way.
Like we're giving them all the ingredients, but no recipe. They might know all the dates and formulas, but they don't really understand the context, the why behind it all.
Exactly, and the source gives a very specific example using history textbooks. It points out that history is often presented from a single, dominant perspective, leaving out a lot of crucial context and alternative viewpoints. It specifically mentions the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and questions whether we've really been taught all the facts, or just a very carefully curated version of events.
It's like, did we really learn about the devastating consequences of those bombings, the human cost, the long-term impact on the environment, or did we just learn that it was a necessary evil to end the war?
And that's the point the source is making. It's arguing that by presenting this sanitized version of history, we're essentially perpetuating a cycle of ignorance and potentially harmful behaviors.
Wow, that's a pretty heavy thought. And it makes you wonder, were things really better 30, 40, 50 years ago, like some people like to claim?
Right, the source challenges that nostalgic view. suggesting that we often romanticize the past while conveniently overlooking its flaws and injustices.
It's easy to do that, though, right? Put on those rose-colored glasses, and suddenly everything seems simpler and happier.
But that's not the whole picture. And that's where the source wants us to dig deeper, to be honest with ourselves about the past, and to learn from its mistakes,
Yeah.
rather than just repeating them.
And that brings us to the source's bold proposal for a radical new approach to education, which we will be diving into in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so where we left off was this idea that our current education system might actually be setting us up to repeat the mistakes of the past. A pretty bold statement, right?
Definitely bold. But I'm curious, how does the source connect those dots between education and, potentially dooming us to repeat history?
Well, it suggests that by putting so much emphasis on memorization, instead of, actually teaching kids how to think critically, we're essentially teaching them what to think. We give them this set of facts, which, as we saw with the history textbook example, might not even be the whole story. And we tell them to just accept it all without question.
It's like we're handing them a prepackaged worldview, instead of giving them the tools to, actually build their own understanding of the world.
Right. And the source argues that this approach can really stifle curiosity and creativity, which then leads to a society that's, well, less innovative and less able to adapt to change. It even goes so far as to say that we're lying to our children. By presenting this sanitized version of history, true history, it says, reveals, while politics justifies.
So instead of learning from the past, we're potentially just going to keep repeating those, let's just say, questionable behaviors, all in the name of upholding a certain narrative.
That's the implication, yeah. The source suggests that by teaching critical thinking and encouraging students to question even those justifiable actions of the past, we could break free from this cycle and create a more evolved future.
Okay, I'm with you so far. But what about all those old values that many people believe are essential for a stable society? Respect for authority, following the rules, that sort of thing.
The source addresses that directly. It challenges this idea that things were actually better in the past, reminding us that nostalgia often overlooks all those negatives, like widespread discrimination, limited access to education and healthcare. And let's not forget about all those questionable actions we were just talking about.
Right, it's like we put on these rose-colored glasses, and suddenly everything seems simpler, happier, more innocent.
But that's not the whole picture. And here's another interesting point. The source argues that it's not actually the younger generation that's creating most of the problems of the world today. In fact, it suggests that young people are actually begging us to change, to stop destroying the environment, to address social injustices, to create a more peaceful and equitable world.
But we often hear that they're the ones who are rebellious, disrespectful of authority. It's the classic kids these days argument.
And the source suggests that those behaviors are actually a direct result of their voices not being heard. Like when they see that their attempts to change things are ignored, they might resort to mimicking the very behaviors they're trying to challenge.
So it's like a cry for help, a desperate attempt to be seen and understood.
That's one way to look at it. The source argues that if we really want to create a better world, we need to start listening to the younger generation, to empower them to think critically and find solutions to the problems they've inherited.
So where does education fit into all of this? We were talking about this earlier, about memorization versus critical thinking.
Right. Well, the source proposes a pretty radical overhaul of the entire education system. It suggests that we shift from a facts-based curriculum to one that's values-based, teaching concepts instead of just subjects. Imagine courses like understanding power, peaceful conflict resolution, joyous sexual expression, ethical economics.
Whoa, hold on a second. Those are definitely not your typical school subjects. Joyous sexual expression? I mean, that would probably make some parents pretty uncomfortable.
It's certainly provocative. But remember, this source is all about challenging the status quo, pushing us outside our comfort zones. And that's the whole point. It argues that by teaching these core concepts, we can give children the tools they need to create a more just and compassionate world.
Oh, okay. I get the big picture idea, but how would that even work in practice? Like, how do you teach understanding power to a bunch of 7th graders?
Well, the source suggests that every subject, from math to language arts, could be taught within the framework of these core concepts. So, for example, instead of just memorizing multiplication tables, students could learn about ethical economics, exploring how math skills can be used to create a more equitable distribution of resources.
So it's about making education relevant to real-world issues, showing kids how the knowledge they're gaining can actually make a positive impact.
Exactly. The source argues that by teaching children how to think, rather than just what to think, We can empower them to create a future that's truly different from the past.
I'm starting to see how all of this connects now. Sex, education, societal evolution. But it seems like a pretty monumental task to change the entire education system. Where would we even begin?
It would definitely require a major shift in thinking. But the source points out that there are already models out there that embrace this values-based approach to education. It specifically mentions the Waldorf school model, which prioritizes critical thinking and experiential learning.
So it's not just a pipe dream. There are actual schools that are putting these ideas into practice.
That's right. The source argues that the Waldorf school is a good example of how education can be done differently, focusing on wisdom and understanding, rather than just memorizing a bunch of facts.
I'm really intrigued by this whole idea of teaching concepts instead of subjects. It seems like it could be a much more powerful way to help kids connect with the material on a deeper level and actually, make a difference in the world.
It is a fascinating concept. And the source emphasizes that by teaching children how to question, how to analyze information critically, and how to form their own conclusions, we can equip them to be truly active and engaged citizens.
But what about those who say that schools should just stick to the basics? Reading, writing, arithmetic, the 3 R's, folks.
The source acknowledges that those skills are important, of course, but it argues that they're not enough in today's world. We need to go beyond just those basic skills and help children develop the critical thinking skills and values they need to navigate the complexities of the world around them.
So it's not an either situation. We can teach those fundamental skills while also fostering a deeper understanding of the world and how to make a positive impact.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance. The source suggests that by weaving these core concepts into every part of the curriculum, we can create a learning environment that's both engaging and empowering.
I see the potential here, but it would take a lot of work, a lot of buy-in from educators, parents, policymakers. Are people even ready for this kind of radical shift?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
But the source is arguing that the stakes are high, like really high. It suggests that the future of our society, maybe even the future of our planet, depends on our ability to educate the next generation in a way that's both informed and compassionate.
It feels like we're at a crossroads. Do we keep doing things the way they've always been done? Or do we dare to imagine something radically different?
Yeah, it does feel like we're at this turning point, doesn't it?
It does.
Like we're being asked to choose between,
Yeah.
Sticking with the familiar or embracing something totally new.
And the source is definitely advocating for that leap into the unknown, this new paradigm for education that goes beyond just filling kids' heads with facts. It's about helping them develop wisdom, compassion, a deep understanding of themselves and their place in the world.
I get it. I do.
Yeah.
But I also have to admit it's a little daunting, Like we've been operating under this one system for so long, and now we're being asked to completely rethink everything. It's a big ask for sure. But the source does offer some guidance. It lays out some specific steps we could take to start moving towards this new model of education, like building a curriculum around these core concepts: awareness, honesty, responsibility.
And I remember those really interesting course titles it suggested: Understanding Power, Peaceful Conflict Resolution, Joyous Sexual Expression. You don't exactly see those in a typical school course catalog.
And that's the point. These courses would go beyond just textbook learning. They would dive into the deeper implications of these concepts. Like imagine a class on understanding power, where students learn about the different ways power operates in the world.
That would be fascinating and so relevant to what's happening in the world today.
Exactly. They could explore how power can be used for good or for bad, and how to navigate those power dynamics in their own lives.
And then there was that idea of peaceful conflict resolution.
Right. Imagine teaching kids how to approach conflict constructively, instead of resorting to aggression or avoidance.
That would be such a valuable skill, not just for their personal relationships, but for society as a whole.
Absolutely. They could learn how to really listen to each other, understand different perspectives, and find solutions that work for everyone involved.
And what about that course on joyous sexual expression? That one really pushes the boundaries, doesn't it?
It does. But again, it's about challenging those societal norms and creating a space for open and honest dialogue about sexuality.
It seems like that would be so beneficial for young people, especially in a culture where sex is so often surrounded by shame and secrecy.
The source argues that by talking about sexuality in a way that's both informative and empowering, we can help kids develop a healthy and positive relationship with their own bodies and with intimacy.
And that all circles back to that core concept of honesty, which the source emphasized right from the start.
Right. It's about being true to ourselves
Hmm.
and encouraging that same authenticity in others.
And it seems like all these pieces fit together, don't they? Like by addressing these core concepts head on, we're giving kids a foundation for creating a better world.
That's the idea. A world that's more just, more compassionate, more fulfilling for everyone.
And the source even suggests that these concepts should be woven into every single subject. Math, science, history, literature. It's not just about adding a few new classes, it's about transforming the entire educational experience.
A complete paradigm shift.
Exactly. And you know, when I first started reading this source, I was a little overwhelmed, to be honest. It all seems so radical, so different from everything we've been taught about education.
I can understand that.
But now I'm actually feeling a sense of excitement. Like this could really be the key to unlocking a better future for our children and for generations to come.
It's definitely a vision worth exploring. And even if we don't agree with everything the source says, it challenges us to think critically, to question those long-held assumptions, and to imagine what a truly evolved society might look like.
And that's what the deep dive is all about, isn't it? Encouraging you, our listeners, to keep asking those tough questions, to keep learning and growing, and to never stop exploring new ideas. So until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep diving deep with us.
Eyes anoint you starlight, ฉันลอยจะจุดเป็นลายสอง